Hello, I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching i24 News. We begin here in the Middle East, where tensions between Israel and Hamas are intensifying. Reports are coming in now that snipers have been firing at Israeli soldiers from the Gaza side of the border with Israel, with no injuries reported at this stage. Now, this all after rockets were fired toward Israeli territory overnight, intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defence system. Flaming balloons with explosive devices were also sent over from Gaza toward the Eshkol region in Israel on Wednesday. Israeli aircraft then targeted certain Hamas positions in Gaza, with Palestinian media reporting that Israeli planes fired missiles at a resistance site northwest of Khan Yunis in the southern part of the Strip. Now, earlier on Wednesday, a teenager from Gaza died in clashes between rioters and Israeli forces along the border fence. And for more on this situation, let's go now to our correspondent Jordana Miller, who is standing by on the Israel-Gaza border. Jordana, thank you very much. Firstly, we're hearing now these fresh reports that snipers are firing at Israeli soldiers stationed there. Tell us, what is the latest on the ground?
That's right, Sarah. We're getting reports from the Israeli army that their forces have come under gunfire from militants in Gaza, and that the Israeli army is responding now with tank fire. That is usually the first step of Israel's response. It is often followed up later by airstrikes in the Strip, and that is what we saw yesterday after those incidents, which you just detailed, both the explosive-laden balloon as well as the at least one mortar that was fired onto Israel, really making sirens go off here in one of the communities and sending residents scrambling for shelter. So as nightfall comes, and as you can see behind me, it is coming, this is when the violence tends to peak along the border. And this week we have seen an uptick nearly every day after a lull somewhat in the violence. And we have just heard that from the Israeli Prime Minister, who is here in this southern region of Israel touring to look at the security situation. And he has just sent out a very stern warning to Hamas. Those are the Islamist militants who run the Gaza Strip, saying that they should not think about increasing the aggression here along the border, that Israel's response will be, quote, severe.
And Jordana, Fridays traditionally they have the Great March of Return, which has been ongoing since March of last year. So tell us, looking forward, what can we expect tomorrow? Do you believe that there'll be a heightened escalation?
Well, Sarah, we're really going to have to wait and see what unfolds. But as you just said, these are protests that have been going on for nearly a year now, begun initially to protest U.S. policies on Jerusalem and the move of the U.S. Embassy. But they have taken on a life of their own and continue to be a protest against the Israeli and Egyptian blockades of the Strip. It is unclear if Hamas will take the decision and usually it is a decision whether to escalate the violence here or not. There were Egyptian mediators in the Strip trying to de-escalate the situation. We have heard some reports that Hamas believes that Hamas has sent messages, rather, that they are not interested in escalating the situation because, according to these reports, they believe it may aid or help Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who, as we know, is in a very tight race for re-election, and Hamas telling at least one reporter in an Arabic media outlet that they do not want to be seen as bolstering or helping the Israeli Prime Minister.
Yes. All right. Jordana Miller on the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you for that update, and we will continue to come back to you later on in the evening. Meanwhile, former IDF chief and head of the newly formed Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, is suing a newspaper considered loyal to his political rival, Benjamin Netanyahu, over a story claiming sexual misconduct, of which the alleged victim says she has no recollection. Gantz has filed a suit against the editor-in-chief of the Israel Hayom broadsheet and a reporter over the story. Now, the report contained second-hand allegations of sexual misconduct from over 4 decades ago, made by an unnamed former classmate of Gantz, who says he exposed himself to his mother and younger sister during a school visit. Now, meanwhile, Gantz is meeting members of the Druze community shortly, and we will, of course, take that live when it happens, so do stay tuned. Staying with Israeli elections, and the Central Elections Committee has disqualified one of the country's two main Arab Israeli parties from running in the upcoming elections after voting in favour of a petition to have the party Ra'am Balad banned. Now, the decision was passed by 17 votes to 10. That petition was filed by the right-wing Likud, Yisrael Beitenu and Jewish Power parties, which claimed that the Arab Israeli Party is supporting terror and is trying to eliminate Israel as a Jewish state. The committee also voted to disqualify Ofer Kasif, a Jewish member of the other Arab Israeli Party, Hadash Ta'al, over his past provocative comments. Now, the Supreme Court will have the final say on both decisions, flying in the face of a recommendation by Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit. Another prominent member of Israel's ruling Likud party, David Bitan, is likely to be indicted for bribery following a police recommendation issued this morning pertaining to an investigation launched in October 2017. He's expected to be implicated in other crimes, including breach of trust, taxes and money laundering. Now, the investigation is expected to continue until after the April elections, when the relevant court documents and evidence will be transferred to the prosecution. Bitan allegedly received huge amounts of money from businessmen to pay off a massive debt while he served as deputy mayor of Israel's fourth largest city. Now, the man who confessed to killing an Israeli teenager in the Jerusalem forest has been charged with rape and murder. Arafat Irafaya, who was arrested 1 month ago after Ori Ansbacher was stabbed to death in Jerusalem's Ein Yael forest. A 29-year-old Palestinian from Hebron has been indicted in the Jerusalem District Court Thursday morning. Irafaya reportedly crossed into Israel from the West Bank illegally, saying he wanted to kill a Jew. He later confessed to the Shin Bet security services, saying the motive for the attack was nationalism. Now, earlier this week, the Israeli Defense Forces handed a demolition order to his family for the destruction of parts of their home. Meanwhile, Israeli forces have today demolished the home of a Palestinian man accused of carrying out at least 2 West Bank shooting attacks. 2 soldiers were killed and a third was seriously wounded near the Givat Asaf outpost in December. Asim Barghouti was also involved in a fatal shooting attack at the Ofra outpost in which a pregnant mother was wounded. Her baby was delivered early and passed away a few days later. Now the terrorists' 2-storey home in the town of Kuba near Ramallah has been destroyed. Meanwhile, 3 Israeli soldiers have been found guilty of beating Palestinian suspects believed to be linked to the killing of their friends in a terror attack in the West Bank. The 3 ultra-Orthodox soldiers from a fighters unit confessed as part of a plea bargain, saying they thought the suspects had collaborated with terrorists who shot dead their comrades at the Givat Asaf outpost in December. Now, as part of a plea bargain which has not yet been approved, the 3 will be sentenced to 190 days in jail, a demotion to the rank of private and probation. The final verdict will be handed down on Sunday. Moving now to Cairo, where an Egyptian police officer has been wounded in a shootout with suspected militants. 7 militants were killed after opening fire on security forces at a checkpoint in the southern part of the Egyptian capital. Now, according to a statement from the Interior Ministry, the militants driving a pickup truck disguised in electricians' work clothes were planning a hostile act, planting a bomb in Giza. Now, checkpoints had been set up in response to intelligence that militants were planning a series of attacks. And we're going out for a short break now, but when we come back, Prime Ministerial candidate Benny Gantz is suing a newspaper. We'll tell you why right after this. Stay with us.
Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all.
David, what should we lead with tonight? Iran, China, Russia, D.C.?
How about North Korea?
Well, on Crossroads, we usually cover them all. I'm Tal Heinrich.
And I'm David Schuster. Join us each night for hard-hitting interviews, detailed analysis,
And the most important information you need to know.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, perspectives. There's more than just one view.
Thanks for staying with us. Former RDF chief and head of the newly formed Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, is suing a newspaper considered loyal to his political rival Benjamin Netanyahu over a story claiming sexual misconduct, of which the alleged victim says she has no recollection. Gantz has filed a suit against the editor-in-chief of the Israel Hayom broadsheet and a reporter over the story. And for more on this and other Israeli election news, let's bring in our diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, thank you. So let's firstly talk about this lawsuit involving Gantz and this newspaper. Tell us, how much impact could it really have on the Blue and White Party ahead of the upcoming elections?
You know, I really don't think it's going to have much of an impact at all. Benny Gantz has made clear that the allegations are false. I think people kind of, in these cases, for better or worse, make up their minds about somebody based generally on preconceived notions anyway. I think if they like Benny Gantz before, they're going to see the allegations probably don't hold water. They happened a long time ago. There's no hard evidence, and I think Gantz will walk away likely unscathed. If people didn't like Benny Gantz to begin with, they're probably looking for a reason anyway to pile on and then would give merit to the allegations. I don't think it's going to have much impact one way or the other. He obviously wasn't playing games, put the lawsuit down very quickly in order to say, listen, I'm not just saying that this is false, I'm putting my credibility on the line and saying that it's false, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Okay, let's not talk about the Sophia Al-Kassif decision, which we reported on a little earlier in the bulletin. Do you think it will stand? And if it does, would he actually be barred from serving?
You know, I'm not sure it's going to stand because the Supreme Court has wide latitude, or has given wide latitude traditionally to candidates to run, even if the Attorney General feels that they shouldn't, even if the Central Elections Committee votes that they shouldn't. The Supreme Court has the final say, and generally speaking, because they know that sometimes things, shockingly, can get political in the Central Elections Committee because you have representatives of the parties themselves voting as to who should be allowed in and who should not be. The Supreme Court has generally said, you know what, let's take the politics out of it. Unless it's something extreme, and I mean to the extreme, everybody should have their shot in a democratic society. I think it's going to be overturned.
And on to another topic now. Coalition whip and Likud member David Bitan is said to be indicted for bribery. Give us a little bit of background on this.
The former coalition whip, he had to leave that position once these allegations surfaced, but still a very, very loyal member of the Likud party, one of Benjamin Netanyahu's enforcers and bulldogs over the last few years, and really made a name for himself in that role. He's accused during his time as deputy mayor of the central city of Rishon LeZion and a little bit of carryover to his time as a member of the Israeli parliament, of accepting bribes in order to facilitate the advancement of real estate deals, construction deals, things of that nature. Apparently, he was caught on tape receiving money. That's a smoking gun for the prosecution. Bitan, from the get-go, and has continued to deny all the allegations, saying, they can all be kind of explained away. And he's so far been able to withstand the storm. He was voted into a realistic spot in the next government, and the allegations coming out now and the recommendations just before the elections, I don't think it's at the top of the ticket. If you have those kinds of allegations against a prime minister, I'm not sure if it's going to impact anybody's vote when you're talking about somebody in the 24th or 25th slot on the ticket, wherever Bitan is.
Well, Mike, it certainly all is happening before these April 9 snap elections. Thank you so much. The Reform Judaism movement in Israel has condemned a billboard campaign against it, the latest in the battle over religion and state in Israel. The top Reform rabbi in Israel spoke to our reporter, Eilon Levy.
Reform grandfather, assimilating father, Gentile grandson. This massive billboard was erected by the Orthodox Chazon movement, criticizing the Reform Judaism movement for its failure to guarantee Jewish continuity. Located symbolically enough, literally on the fault line between the ultra-Orthodox city of Bnei Brak and the Tel Aviv suburb of Ramat Gan.
Well, this is part of a growing wave of incitement against our movement in Israel and worldwide. This is an attempt to suggest that Reform Judaism has no place here in Israel. In Israel, there is no challenge of interfaith marriages in the end. And this sign is not relevant to the Israeli reality, and it is not published in Brooklyn. It is published in Tel Aviv.
Rabbi Kariv says the sign proves Israel's Orthodox religious establishment is running scared.
They truly understand that hundreds of thousands of Israelis are interested in egalitarian Judaism and are sick with the religious coercion they identify in the ultra-Orthodox establishment.
A landmark study by the Pew Research Center in 2013 showed a majority of Reform Jews in America marry non-Jews, and a majority of those who marry out don't raise their children Jewish. Rabbi Kariv says high intermarriage rates are unfortunate, but Reform Judaism keeps Jews who would otherwise leave the tribe inside.
Intermarriage, assimilation, this is part of the Jewish reality in diaspora communities. And we need to decide how do we deal with those challenges. From an historic perspective, our choice to fight over the Jewish potential that exists in each family with Jewish roots, this is the right historic decision.
The group behind the campaign has not responded to requests for comment, but in the battle between the Orthodox religious establishment and pluralist Jewish groups, nobody plans to be silent. Eilon Levy, I24 News.
Let's move now to the Israel-Egypt border, and the Prime Minister today visited and met with commanders of the Gaza division. Here's what he has to say about the security situation regarding Hamas.
I am aware that in recent days there has been a renewal of Hamas aggression in all kinds of strange ways. Hamas should understand now that any manifestation of aggression will be met with a more severe response from Israel. Better understand it now than afterward.
Staying with politics here in Israel, and the right-wing Zehut parties in favour of annexing the West Bank and legalising cannabis. Our correspondent Alec Pollard takes a look at one of Israel's unique parties with a liberal, social and economic agenda.
My friends, Zehut's idea is greater than the sum of its parts. To be a free people in our land. Freedom, ladies and gentlemen.
Don't be mistaken. This is indeed an election rally, that of Zehut, meaning identity, a right-wing political party that defines itself as ultra-liberal, advocating legalization of cannabis in Israel. The party's leader, Moshe Feiglin, is well known in the Israeli right, ever since the Oslo Accords back in 1993. Convicted for civil disobedience for organizing mass blockades of public highways in protest of the Oslo process and the creation of the Palestinian Authority. A longtime inhabitant of the West Bank, Feiglin spent many years in the ruling Likud party. but left after the 2015 elections to create his own party, Zehut.
Zehut is a party of freedom. Legalization is a good example of the state's excessive interference in the private lives of citizens. We want a free market, not just in cannabis, but also in the economy, in education, and in culture.
But this ultra-liberal also advocates Jewish sovereignty over the entire West Bank, while paying Palestinians there to emigrate. Along with a militant security agenda that supports targeted killings, it's one of Israel's most hawkish parties. Yet Feiglin has composed a very diverse list of potential members of parliament, such as comic Gadi Vilchelsky, a longtime outspoken advocate for legalization of cannabis. He is right behind Nitzan Kahana, who is none other than the daughter-in-law of ultra-nationalist Rabbi Meir Kahana, who led the far-right Kach movement before it was outlawed as a terror organization.
We don't have the same overall vision, but we do have some things in common. There's only one party that says loud and clear that its condition to be part of a future government is the legalization of cannabis. Why not? You, my brother the reporter, also have the right to join at the end of the day.
Zehut's liberal agenda can potentially swing young voters and perhaps make it one of the surprise parties of the elections. Alec Pollard, I-24 News.
In North Africa, there's a growing call for Algeria's four-term president to step down. He's been in power for 20 years, he's 81, and hasn't addressed the nation in about 7 years. But officials from the ruling party claim he's mentally fit to serve. Our French correspondent, Christian Millard, has conducted numerous interviews with the president of Algeria, and this week he looks at what could ultimately topple the government.
According to many analysts, a majority of Algerians have had enough of 20 years of Abdelaziz Bouteflika's presidency. It is because they are frustrated with a leader who just turned 82 and has become a political ghost in a wheelchair following a 2013 stroke. Bouteflika has not spoken in public in 7 years. There is talk of a possible shift in the balance of power in a place ruled for years by a gerontocracy that has remained from the country's war of independence against France 57 years ago. People demonstrate because the economic situation is chaotic. State revenues have dropped sharply with falling oil prices, forcing the government to make cuts in the social program. Many observers say that today it is essentially a movement of the youth. They add also it is this contempt for Algerians that is pushing this uprising, along with the rampant corruption and a mafia gang who took the president as an hostage. During my 6 interviews with President Bouteflika between 1999 and 2012, I never got the impression that he could understand the necessity to share with the Algerians dividends of natural resources, which are oil and gas, to stabilize the country and prevent radical imams of mosques from becoming the receptacle of the disarray of the people. Because these players of the game cannot agree on a successor, they prefer to let an elderly man in feeble health continue as head of state or as a political puppet. The question today is, what will the army do in the face of future popular unrest?
As US President Donald Trump has declared the defeat of Islamic State, Kurdish authorities are now being held accountable for what seems to be a frightening trend. Our Middle East correspondent Emily Rose reports.
A damning report by Human Rights Watch says Iraqi and Kurdish authorities were detaining about 1,500 children by the end of 2018 for alleged links to Islamic State, but that these youth are innocent.
You have to remember, as boys who lived under ISIS for upwards of 3 years, they themselves witnessed the group executing their friends, their relatives, people in their community. So these boys had a lot of hatred for the group and what the group did to their society.
In 2014, Kurdish authorities launched a military campaign to take back swaths of land that were under control of the Islamic State militant group, and many former fighters were detained. But tactics used by Kurdish authorities may violate international law.
International law is very clear that when a defendant is under 18, Time in prison should be kept to a minimum. And even if they are going to serve prison time, the focus of the state's interaction with them and treatment of them should really be around rehabilitation and reintegration into society following their release.
And as U.S. President Donald Trump declares the defeat of the Islamic State, the damage left over still lies in its wake. Emily Rose, I-24 News.
And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. But of course, we are continuing to bring you all of the breaking stories. So do go ahead and visit us online. That's i24news.tv. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.